We are very excited to welcome today's speakers for a conversation on the future of Hetch Hetchy Valley and what this effort is looking like. What are the next steps? What's happening? There is some new changes that happened this year. We are joined by Robert Hanna and Spreck Rosekrans, and hopefully, Spreck, I didn't butcher your last name and apologize for that. Um, but Robert Hanna, many of you know, he's the great-great-grandson of John Muir, is a public lands advocate in his own right with over 20 years of experience bringing people together around conservation. Known for building unlikely partnerships and advancing public lands conservation, he's helping lead efforts to restore Hetch Hetchy Valley while ensuring a reliable water supply for San Francisco. And Spreck brings more than 3 decades of experience in Western water and conservation issues to his role as executive director of Restore Hetch Hetchy. A long time expert in river restoration and water planning. He's helping advance a vision to restore Hetch Hetchy Valley. And we are very excited to have you all joining us today. I don't know, Robert and Spreck, do you want to say a quick hi? Otherwise, I can pull up the slides as well for you all.
I defer to Spreck. No, real
Well,
quick, I just wanted to thank everybody for your time. This is an effort that I know a lot of folks I do know on here have been supportive of, have even worked on. It's an effort that's very dear to Spreck and I, so just wanted to say thank you for everybody listening in today. Thank you.
yeah, thanks.
Oh, well,
Let's get into it. Great to be here with everybody, and great to see some old friends, Alex and Betsy and Harold and Stuart, and a lot of folks that I haven't met.
So I'm going to go ahead and just kick it off. There's so many different starting points to have this conversation, and I was kind of thinking through my head, over the last hour. And I think for today, I want to go with this. If if restoring the Hetch Hetchy Valley inside Yosemite National Park in any way meant the city of San Francisco or anybody losing their water, we just wouldn't be here. That's something that Spreck and I have talked extensively about. Um, and that's one of the most important things that I want to start this whole thing with. We have a path forward to show how that could be done. We have an incredible opportunity, but that I think is the best place to start today in letting everybody know that. So that's what I'd like to start with. Go ahead, next slide. Oh. Um, you know, for more than a century, Hetch Hetchy has been one of America's great unfinished conversations. And, even though people before us gave the permission to have it destroyed, we just have an incredible opportunity in front of us. And that's exactly what we're asking, today is, how do we do that together? And we can 100% accomplish this. And what's amazing about this call is we have so many different, public land advocates and people that are passionately working for the things that we love. And that's the beauty about our public lands. And that's, in having this conversation with Hetch Hetchy, it's important to have these conversations. It's not a us versus them. This is a collective effort that every single one of us um, must unite around in, leaving something for future generations better. Next slide. So most public debates, they create winners and losers. But what if our country could restore something extraordinary? What if nobody had to give anything up that they already have? What if this was about addition rather than division? And in 1913, the conversation was water or wilderness. But, because of technology and water management, evolving today, we now know that we could have both. This conversation has literally fundamentally changed. Next slide. And again, to focus on, what we're talking about today and what we're bringing forth to, not just Californians, but to the people all over our country is a true win-win. Water security where nobody loses their water, adding in restoration, adding in nobody loses water rights. We're trying to build this conversation to show everybody that we have a true path forward where everybody gains. And the picture that you see in this slide, for instance, this is a colorized version of a real black and white photo of the Hetch Hetchy Valley before. And it just shows you, I mean, this is something so beautiful and so worth fighting for that how could you not? Go ahead, next slide. And this is one of my favorite images. There's a black and white photo that I colorized here. And I mean, I just pause and can imagine standing in a second Yosemite Valley. Imagine future generations experiencing this landscape. Imagine restoring something that was lost for over a century. I mean, some opportunities, they just come once in a lifetime, and I truly believe that this is one of them. And we're talking about the greatest restoration project in history. We're talking about something that cannot be done anywhere in the world but right here in delivering back to future generations another Yosemite Valley. So, I mean, when I look at this photo, it's exactly what was lost. It's exactly what lies, you know, beneath 300 feet of water today. That's what's waiting for us to act. That is what is waiting for us to free it. And again, just the moment that we're in will speak to all future generations if we act. Go ahead. Um, our public lands, they belong equally to all Americans. And, I really wanted to show that, as much as this is a California issue and a California national park, these incredible places, they transcend politics and geography. Our public lands, they remind us of who we are as a nation. This isn't just a California story. This is an American story. And, a wrong done to any one of our public lands is a wrong done to all of us. And, when we look at examples like the boundary waters and what's happening in Alaska, lease, you mentioned earlier the roadless rule, or, the Congressional Review Act and what's happening with that today. Even though many people haven't been to those places, people all across the country are uniting to protect those places. And so, what we can accomplish here in California in bringing back the Hetch Hetchy Valley, I mean, this is something that unites all of us. Go ahead. And to touch on Lisa, when she talked about, some of the current momentum building, a recent statewide report that Spreck's organization, Restore Hetch Hetchy, did showed 4-1. Californians are for restoration if it means, San Francisco not losing their water. This movement rooted right here is now a conversation that's going to power the country. And together, we can build this reality. People from all over are beginning to engage, young and old. I mean, you see on social media, there's many, influencers that are, understanding this opportunity, and they're starting to use their platforms to speak out. This opportunity is real, and it's exciting to see, the movement is gaining a momentum that's, reaching so many now. And, without a doubt, I mean, the support is there, and that's exactly, what we're going to be, bringing forth to have this conversation, not just here in California, but to people all over the country. Go ahead. And this is a real snapshot based, sourced from the National Park Service and University of Wisconsin reports. This is the timeline that you're looking at. And we have real examples today, whether it's the Klamath or the Elwha Dam removal project. Um, this is the real timeline to see not just what happens on day one, but where we can visualize for the future for our children and our grandchildren and, great great grandchildren, to know that, once we act today, that will start a process that over, decades, families can enjoy. And, the amazing thing about this is, this process would serve as an international classroom from people all over the world to come and witness a project so great that it can only be done right here. And, nowhere on earth, than in our backyard is this a reality. And so this is a real timeline to show folks, we can do this. If we act, it'll start the process on day one. And like I said, we've already seen, in the Klamath and some of the other examples that are out there, in just over a decade, many of these places have already, come back to life. So I wanted to show people, a real visual of what's in front of us. Go ahead. And there have been a lot of people don't realize there have been decades of reports and studies done, and every single one of them points to the same thing. Yes, the Hetch Hetchy Valley can be restored. I mean, going back to the 80s, it was actually under the Reagan administration where his Secretary of the Interior, Don Hodel, proposed restoration in the 80s. And from those conversations, that gave us the first set of federal reports. So if you go onto Spreck's organization's website, you could read through every study and every report that's been done. But we're talking about multiple federal reports, state reports, academic reports, organizational reports. The state of California, then Senator Lois Wolk worked with the Schwarzenegger administration, and the state came out with their report. So every single one of these is pointing to the same thing. Yes, it can be done. And now with today, as it says, a new generation of science and engineering and water management offers that path forward. So from here, I'm actually going to kick it over to Spreck because I know Spreck is going to, get into his organization's new Cherry report, which shows yet another example of how this could be done without anybody losing their water or water rights and a lot of those questions that people have asked. So Spreck, I turn it over to you, my friend.
Okay, hey Robert, thanks very much. Spreck Rosekrans, and thanks again to everybody for joining today. Let me first say that restoring Yosemite's second Great Valley would be such a wonderful thing in and of itself, but it's also a place where so many people connect to the environment for the first time. I think it would just inspire generations, and if you can imagine families coming back every few years as the valley comes back to life, I think it'd be just a inspiration like none other. And the poll Robert mentioned that was we didn't do the poll. We hired an independent company to ask the question: should we restore Hetch Hetchy if it can be done without impacting San Francisco's water supply? And 4 times as many people said yes as said no. And lastly, I got hired by the Environmental Defense Fund in 1988, and as a number cruncher, not as an advocate, not as a political guy, not as an executive director or manager, as a computer programmer. And I got into energy systems and water systems, and was the first person outside the Department of Water Resources to get a hold of its statewide planning model and something called Fortran and everything. So I'm a nerd at heart. And so I really come at this from a planning point of view, even though I've been distracted into the world of politics and team building and asking you folks to sign letters of petitions and so forth. But I want to talk. I'm going to get a little bit into the weeds, and I can always do that more offline, just to try and convince you that yes, this can be done and provide plenty of water to San Francisco and their other customers in the Bay Area. So here's a diagram of the system. There are 9 reservoirs here that hold water as part of the system. The best known, of course, is Hetch Hetchy, and most of the Tuolumne water all flows through Hetch Hetchy, but it can also be done without holding water in that reservoir. Next slide, please. Um, One thing that's been helpful, and the cherry solution is based on this report that shows that San Francisco's had a sustained 19% decrease in demand over the last decade. And nobody thinks it's going back up. And this is San Francisco and all their customers in the Bay Area. They use about a quarter as much water on the Tuolumne as the Turlock and Modesto irrigation districts. And they've got just so much storage that they really don't need as much as they have. Okay, next slide, please. So what we propose is, and if you can see it in the middle of the diagram here, the sort of candy cane colored intertie between two of San Francisco's power plants. They would be able to take water from Cherry Reservoir and put it into their pipeline system that goes to the Bay Area. Right now, the water they have in Cherry and Eleanor Reservoir does not go to the Bay Area. But they would also just take the river when it's flowing. And most of the time, the river is flowing. And so what we did is we did this whole monthly model thing over all the droughts and wet years of the 20th century, and showed that on average, most of the water would come from Hetch Hetchy, and some would come from Cherry, more in the dry years. Next slide, please. And so I don't think any other water system has 6 times as much storage as they have annual demand. This is just sort of off the chart, so to speak. And what we're saying is that in this case, with this reduced demand, they don't even need to replace the water. And we'll get into what they can do if they want to just invest in more water supply and so forth. But they really don't need Hetch Hetchy Reservoir to meet customer demand even through the droughts of the 20th century. Next slide, please. So this is the last nerdy slide. Bear with me for a minute. What this does is takes the results of a monthly model through all the wet years and droughts of the 20th century. Those of you to remember, old enough to remember, if anybody's old enough to remember, 1977, super dry year, and then 87 to 92 was the longest sustained drought. And this is how the system would operate with the Turlock and Modesto, with San Francisco, without Hetch Hetchy Reservoir, and it would meet that red line demand in every single year. And the worst possible outcome would be, or the riskiest would be, at the end of 1992, San Francisco would still have twice their average annual demand in storage. I don't think any other water system in the state or anywhere in the West has that kind of reliability. Anyway, we did this report. We published it in January. I wrote to Congress about it. I've talked with lots of folks, and we'll get into that a little bit more in a minute. Next slide, please. On the other hand, if San Francisco says, hey, wait a minute, no, we need more water, we need to be even more reliable, they can do what other water agencies in California have done. And other water agencies, other urban water agencies, have invested in water supply to the tune of maybe 15 or 16 Hetch Hetchy reservoirs over the last 30 years. Some of them have built local surface storage, the gold bars at the top. There are many that are currently investing in water recycling. San Diego is probably the furthest ahead. Those are ongoing projects. And then folks have invested in groundwater banking, mostly in Kern County, which is along the California aqueduct. San Francisco's aqueduct doesn't go through Kern County, but there's lots of groundwater banking opportunities over in Stanislaus County. And our Yosemite's opportunity report gets into all these in detail and shows that San Francisco could do any of these things if they want to get more. We don't think they actually need it, but it's certainly an opportunity. Next slide, please. So Restore Hetch Hetchy was founded in 1999. I first went to a meeting at the invitation of the Sierra Club's David Brower, who I'd worked with a little bit on the Colorado River, and then I got the Environmental Defense Fund where I was working involved. They got in, they got out. But our approach for up until last year really was, okay, you got to replace that 360,000 acre feet with those things that we just saw. And now we're saying you don't really need it. And you do the intertie at Cherry, you don't need the storage. You take the river when it's flowing at the end of Hetch Hetchy Valley. And importantly, you don't need to involve the Turlock Modesto irrigation districts. They are physically and institutionally intertwined with San Francisco. They don't get along with San Francisco except when they need to take on the environmental community, whether it's us or whether it's salmon flows or something else. And in this case, it doesn't need to involve them whatsoever. And San Francisco, we'll talk about San Francisco in a minute, but they're an opponent here. They like the system the way it is. It's not normal for an environmental group to go after what is considered a left-wing city, but in this case, it is their reservoir, and they're kind of, at least city leaders are pretty attached to it. Next slide, please. So what we did to estimate the cost of restoration, there's no real water supply infrastructure. We took the conveyance changes that are necessary in the Sierra that were evaluated 20 years ago in the Department of Water Resources report, escalated them 50% for science and engineering, used their valley restoration, dam removal, or dam modification costs, and so forth, added in all kinds of 30% of everything for engineering and legal administration, and come up with a $1.4 to $3.6 billion estimate. I'm sure San Francisco is going to tell us it's a whole lot more than that, and we'd love to have that public conversation. Next slide, please. So what we did is early in the year, we sent letters to everybody in Congress and all the officials in San Francisco, and San Francisco has declined to talk to us. That's nothing new. We've had some preliminary conversations with members of Congress some that are interested, some are maybe a little skeptical. But what we want to do is go in over the next several months and target really, frankly, after November. We think that there's likely to be a flip in the House. We don't know that for sure. And there are members who are sympathetic to restoration, who would like to see restoration, but they need a little bit of confidence boost in terms of, so we're asking people to sign a petition, individuals. We're asking you folks who represent organizations to sign an organizational letter of support. We're going to show our poll, and we're going to go into offices with other folks who know that restoration can and should be accomplished. And the idea is to ask Congress, not for legislation, but to ask San Francisco to engage in a conversation, to ask San Francisco what they would need as part of a restoration package. And when San Francisco responds to Congress, they can't ignore Congress. They can either be reasonable and we can have a discussion and hopefully come up with a plan, or if they come back and they say, oh, that, we need, tens of billions and we need this and we need that. If they're unreasonable, then maybe Congress would consider restoration. But it's been too long, really, and by some measures, this is the sort of the initial big blow to our environment that happened over 100 years ago. It sort of turned the Sierra Club from an outing club into a political organization. And it's time to make Yosemite whole again and to inspire a new generation. Next slide, please. So again, I'm love to get any kind of help from and support from folks. we have a letter. I think it's been circulated to you folks in the email, or maybe Lisa's going to send it again. We've got a petition for individuals to sign, and if anybody wants to ask more questions, you've got my email and phone number and whatever, and I'm happy to talk about the details of all this. But from our perspective, the time to make a major push to Congress is now. I will mention some specific names here, and no member of Congress has publicly come out recently and said, "Hey, I'm going to help with this." But Congressman Costa and Garamendi have indicated support for years. Garamendi did write a op-ed 20 years ago that was very good. Costa we're less enthusiastic about because he's kind of beholden to Turlock and Modesto, even though they're not in his district. Jared Huffman, former NRDC lawyer, is likely to be, if the Democrats take the House, appointed to head the Natural Resources Committee. And we've talked to his folks, we've talked to him, and I'm going to target him personally, and we're going to go in. I hope to go in to a meeting with him and several other folks, and say, "Hey, Jared, we think the time is now." He's supporting the dam removal and the eel in a big way, and we hope that he would be a leader. I've had some interesting conversations with John Watts on Senator Padilla's staff, and Watts ironically used to work for Senator Feinstein, who was dead set opposed to us, and he's a little skeptical, but he's a very sharp guy, and I'm hoping that he'll be involved as well. And there's some other names, and if anybody else has suggestions, we'll be approaching others as well. Anyway, thank you for listening. I think I'm done here. I'm happy to. Robert and I are happy to take questions.
Lisa, also, this is the slide, everybody, with Spreck and mine's contact information. So I just wanted to make sure everybody had this. And Lisa, I'll turn it over to you.
Now, let me stop sharing. And Alex, why don't you jump in? I don't know if you have questions. I also have several questions that were submitted. But yeah, go for it, Alex.
Yeah, well, I guess question and a comment. One, interested if you're engaging with Connie Chan and Scott Wiener in San Francisco. I personally really hope that Scott Wiener does not make it to Congress, but we'll have new representation in San Francisco. And so wondering if, there's been any progress with conversations with either one of them. And then also just your thoughts on, I know we can't dismantle the SFPUC, but they're probably one of the worst water agencies in trying to defend racist water rights systems. And I mean, they're just terrible. And I don't know about Mayor Lurie, but back in London Breed's days, there was just no daylight between the mayor's office and SFPUC. And we tried and run water rights bills to try and just create a little bit more equity in the system. And the mayor's office would be making personal calls to members and just so strongly opposed to changing anything about a water rights system that didn't even acknowledge that tribal people were citizens, pre-1914. So curious, any thoughts on what we could do around the SFPUC? Clearly I'm venting a little bit here, but they're a big part of this problem. And yeah, just would love your thoughts.
Well, music to my ears to hear you have had the same experiences we have. We have not reached out to Connie Chen. I've met with Scott Wiener twice, and I think he's gonna have to get on the train later. He's not been supportive, and again, we want some other members. And if I talk to Huffman or somebody else, and he'll probably have a suggestion about what to say to Wiener. If he'll ask me the same question, and I'll say, well, he hasn't been supportive in the past, and we can tell him, I'd love to have you can tell him, or if you're going to do this, you can tell him, or we can tell him. We'd like to give him a heads up. We'd like to be polite about it. Like to give him an opportunity to come around. As far as I can tell, uh, with Lurie, he's sort of a new guy and he's got a environmental background of some sorts, but he's got handlers, and we haven't gotten past his handlers. I don't know if he would be as opposed, but he's a busy guy. There's lots of stuff going on in San Francisco. I did have an interesting conversation with a guy named Mark Shahinian at the Sierra Club, who's a new, fairly new guy at the San Francisco group of the Sierra Club, and they've actually his group is signed under our letter. I think the whole club will come around, but they have process in the Sierra Club, and he was actually talking about ways to reform the SFPUC, and do you need a ballot measure? Should they be elected rather than appointed, and so forth? But it's yeah, it's I respect the fact that they have real responsibility in delivering water and wastewater and power and everything, but they're a recalcitrant institution basically, and I do find some people on the staff I'd say they're my friends in some sense, but as an institution, you know they need reform, they need improvement, not just on Hetch Hetchy, but on a ton of things.
And I'm going to hop in real fast just to say, Ms. Spreck, I mean, I reached out to Mayor Lurie's office and they declined to meet. And we're transparent. Like we'll have this conversation. It's like we're not looking to hide. We want to bring everybody to the table. We can't force them, but we're also not just going to wait another 100 years. The time is now to have these conversations. Um, it's my belief that, we need to solve big problems. And if we can do it together, and if you have an opportunity with today's technology and innovation to do that, we owe it to future generations. They could think what they want, but we're not waiting anymore. So our door is always open to anybody. And even if they disagree, that's okay too. I mean, we have to get to a point in this country where we could have difficult conversations and agree to disagree. But for something like this is worth fighting for. And I've always believed that if opportunity doesn't knock, you just build the door. And I've worked with many of you on different public lands efforts where it looked impossible. And, you know, you can't look at it that way. So the door is always going to be open, and we will knock on those doors to initiate that conversation. But we will continue to build this effort brick by brick with or without any one individual.
There are a couple of good questions in the chat, and they kind of wave into a couple of questions that were submitted on when folks RSVP. And there are two of those questions that I think it would be very important to touch base on today. One of them is related to, I think, Katie mentioned about, restoration, because that is such a big endeavor, restore Hetchy Hetchy. And I think there was a question one is like the new proposal, it's not require any expansion of other reservoirs or creation of new reservoirs, right? Or like would potentially the restoration of Hetchy Hetchy cause further damage to habitats downstream, or even the case I think Alex started mentioning, and I love that we have touch base of Klamath dam removal. Like we are seeing like life kind of thriving back. So I just wanted to create a little bit space here to Robert and Spreck to talk a little bit about the restoration, potentially further impacts or management related to that. And then I would love to have another question and conversation related to tribal engagement as well. So.
Sure. I'll add one quick thing before I turn this one over to Spreck. We referenced a lot about the federal and state reports. In a lot of those reports, they've always given a very wide range for the cost. On the higher end, it was always if you start building new dams and things like that. One quick note is Spreck had mentioned at the beginning of this year, he and I co-authored a letter that went out to every member of Congress as well as Mayor Lurie. On that letter was Lois Wolk, who was the former senator that I told you initiated the state report in the Schwarzenegger administration, and Don Hodel. Don Hodel, I mentioned earlier, he was the Secretary of the Interior under Ronald Reagan, who proposed restoration in the 80s. And what Don, I mean, he's just a wealth of knowledge, and he's so active, and he's just been incredible, just kind of getting his perspective on things. He had mentioned also to save cost, one of the things that you could do, and I know Spreck will touch on this, is to actually leave the dam in place. Let the dam serve as a monumental visual reminder of what we were able to overcome, and then just by punching a hole through the bottom, you would be able to save so much costs by that way. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there before I'll turn it over to Spreck. We do have options.
So in terms of damage by replacement water infrastructure, again, what we're promoting now is simply changes in conveyance, how the water is moved, and frankly, we don't think they need another reservoir. San Francisco has proposed to enlarge what's called the Calaveras Reservoir, which is an option. It's a pretty expensive option. If San Francisco does the cost-effective thing to invest in new supply, what it would do would be to bank groundwater in Stanislaus County. There's an area called East Side, this east of Turlock Irrigation District, where they've got a great big groundwater deficit, and I don't know if anybody's following the whole groundwater sustainability implementation in California, but there's so much opportunity for a place where San Francisco puts in a little bit of money, puts in water in wet years, takes out water in dry years, and so forth. That would be the thing, and that's pretty environmentally benign. It's what Los Angeles and San Jose and most of Southern California have been doing in Kern County, this groundwater banking for the last couple decades. So I think that there's no real danger of we're going to dam some other nice place up if we restore Hetch Hetchy. That's just doesn't need to happen.
Yeah, most people don't realize San Francisco has a total of 9 reservoirs in their entire system. And Hetch Hetchy is not the only dam that they built inside Yosemite National Park. Up at the far northern boundary, there's actually another one. So, but they have 9 reservoirs in their total system.
I'm muted. We are almost around the time. Robert and Spreck, would you be potentially able to stay additional 5 minutes?
Sure.
And
Yep.
if folks needs to hop off, please hop off. But I think we'll love to touch base. I think Andrew shared another good question there. How would the project be financed? So maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, and we can close off with the tribal engagement or opportunities
Sure.
that restoring Hetch Hetchy could also bring for tribes.
Yeah. Yeah. The financing is something that Spreck and I have talked about, and I've also had in my conversations with different folks. But Spreck, I think that it's addressed in your report also, so I'll let you talk about the ideas that we've thrown out there to be taken into consideration once things get further down the line.
Yeah, well, there's four sources really: ratepayer funds, state funds, federal funds, and philanthropy. And we have not made any determination as to what should happen. We think that there's when San Francisco comes and talks about the cost of it, we'd like to be able to say, well, we think this state or federal government could help out. Don Hodel's been a big proponent of philanthropy because he directed the restoration of the Statue of Liberty, and hundreds of millions of dollars came in, and thinks that more would be available for Hetch Hetchy. So it's somewhere in all those things. I think that the physical infrastructure would probably in the valley, and the restoration of the valley itself would probably come from public funds, and then infrastructure for San Francisco would might be offset or much offset or partly offset by public funds. Operating costs would probably fall on to some degree on ratepayers, but they'd be pretty minor.
Thank you. Yeah, and from what I understand, like the step right now is just trying to really push so the conversations can move forward, right? And like based on those conversations is where you can start to have a better idea of the cost and like where would that come from.
That's right.
Yep.
Why don't we finish up talking a little bit? So we all know that the Hetch Hetchy Valley has deep cultural significance for several associated tribes. Yeah, and just wanted to create space here of like if there has been engagement with tribes or even like what do you envision as if as this project takes form and conversations takes form, tribal engagement in shaping that future.
Sure. Historically, there have been, a handful of tribes connected to the Hetch Hetchy Valley. And a few of the reports that we referenced earlier, when the state of California did their report, state officials met with the tribes at that point and discussed restoration in the future of the valley. And it was expressed in those conversations that if the reservoir was to be drained, the tribes wanted to make sure that they were thoroughly involved in both the decision-making process and the long-term management of the land. Um, the four major key points that were brought up as their priorities was the first one was development within the valley should remain very limited and avoid replicating the level of development found in Yosemite today. The second one was recreation should focus on low impact activities. The third one was restoration of native plants, wildlife, springs, and ecological systems should be a major priority. And the fourth one was that the tribes should have access to ceremonial grounds in culturally significant areas. So those were the things that were discussed in those conversations when the state of California was putting together their state report. And I agree. I mean, any discussion about the future of Hetch Hetchy should absolutely 100% include tribal voices, from now and moving forward. And so what I would love to do is I would love to be connected to tribal leaders and members to create my own, kind of relationship. And so from there that we can collaborate, share ideas, and then that way I can make sure that in any conversations that we're having or meetings or things like that, that offer obviously is extended for them to be a part of that conversation.
If I could just add to that, we've reached out, we've had some conversations, and mostly, I think there'll be more interest if this moves along a little further. This is not the Klamath. In the Klamath, you've got three tribes that live on the river. These folks who used and lived in or traveled through Hetch Hetchy, that came to an end uh, sometime in the 1860s or 1870s, and so that they're not as connected to it. They do have history there, and they're aware of that history. There are some are concerned that there are burial grounds there and so forth. But there's the conversations we've had. There's varying levels of interest, but the Restored Hetchy Board has adopted a policy that tribes should be offered the opportunity for co-management of a restored valley, but that's a discussion to have at a future time. But we'll be talking with folks in Congress about that opportunity. And
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah. And that's something again, that I, reiterate in each of mine was, those key priorities. So I would love to work, collaboratively hand in hand with them to that process and develop that working relationship. So.
Thank you. And thank you both so much for staying, everyone, for staying 5 minutes over the time. I apologize for that. I think we had like some big updates in the beginning, but really appreciate Robert and Spreck for joining us today and everyone else like new to this group and our members.